The time was 6:47 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day. My mother's dining room featured an extended oak table, prepared to seat 34 guests. This particular table stretched across the entire length of the room, typically brought out just once annually when all relatives gathered, occupying every seat. The turkey was already portioned, candles flickered, and the linen napkins had been artfully folded into small fan shapes. A fragrant mix of rosemary and butter filled the air, along with the distinct warmth generated by an overcrowded, slightly undersized room. My mother then rose, holding her wine glass aloft, as if preparing to deliver a corporate address. "To the family that truly counts," she declared, a smile gracing her lips. 33 glasses elevated in unison, the wine shimmering under the candlelight. A laugh echoed through the room. My sister, Olivia, touched her glass to my brother Ethan's, while our other brother, Owen, had already begun eating, prioritizing the sweet potato casserole over any toast. Next, my mother directed her gaze toward me. Her glass remained still, and her expression was unaltered. Her eyes simply scanned me with the detached appraisal one might give an item of furniture considered for replacement. "You won't inherit a cent from Grandma. You've never lifted a finger for her," she stated, her voice clear enough for everyone present at the table to distinctly hear. Not a single person flinched or offered a correction. The 33 guests remained seated, their glasses still raised, utterly silent. I, too, stayed silent. I placed my napkin on the table, retrieved my coat from the chair's back, and exited the house at 6:49 p.m. without glancing behind me. What remained unknown to all of them, my mother, Olivia, Ethan, Owen, indeed every one of the 34 individuals at that table, was that I had been Grandma Aliner's caregiver for 3 years. This involved weekly visits, occasionally twice a week, handling doctor's appointments, grocery shopping, prescription pickups, and even 2:00 a.m. plumbing crises. All these tasks I performed discreetly and independently. 11 days following that Thanksgiving meal, Grandma Aliner passed away. A week later, a call from the lawyer initiated the collapse of everything my mother had believed about our family dynamics. To grasp the events of that will reading, one must first comprehend Aliner Vance's identity. And for that, understanding our family is essential. Grandma Aliner, whom everyone affectionately called Ellie, was 78 years old when these events began. She resided in a modest colonial house on Whispering Pines Lane, situated in a peaceful suburb approximately 40 minutes outside the city. The mortgage on her home had been paid off for over 2 decades. She had lived there since before my mother's birth, having purchased it with my grandfather for a sum that our generation can scarcely imagine. She wasn't what most people would consider a wealthy woman. She didn't drive a luxury vehicle, nor did she wear designer clothing. She frequented the same grocery store for 40 years, even clipping coupons from the Sunday paper out of habit, despite not needing to. However, what most of my family neglected to discover was that Grandma Ellie had been quietly and systematically investing for decades. My grandfather, a mechanical engineer, was financially prudent rather than ostentatious. When he passed 12 years prior, he left Ellie with more than just the house. He bequeathed her a retirement portfolio that had matured untouched for over 30 years. Ellie, sharp as a tack until her final days, had allowed it to continue growing. None of us knew the precise amount, not even my mother, because no one thought to inquire, and Grandma Ellie never volunteered the information. My mother, Lisa, was the eldest of Ellie's 3 children. She governed the family, orchestrating holidays, dispatching group texts, and dictating seating arrangements at dinner. It was she who, somewhere along the way, decided I held the least importance within our family. I was 19 when this began, having just withdrawn from community college, not due to a lack of desire to learn, but because I couldn't afford it and my parents wouldn't assist. Olivia, by contrast, attended a 4-year university, fully funded. My parents covered her tuition, apartment, books, and all other expenses. When I requested even a small loan to complete my degree, my father stated, "We can't just give money to everyone. Olivia graduated with honors, and my parents hosted a party with over 60 guests in her honor. Meanwhile, I earned my GED through an online program while working 2 jobs, a fact no one ever acknowledged. This pattern persisted for years. By 23, I had secured a stable position at a healthcare nonprofit. Though I wasn't earning a fortune, I was managing a small team. I excelled at my work and was building a meaningful career. Still, at family gatherings, my mother would introduce me as the one who didn't finish school, as if that single detail wholly defined who I was. Olivia ascended to a marketing executive role, which my parents proudly announced to everyone. Ethan became a sales manager, a source of equal pride for them. Owen was still finding his path, but as the youngest, he faced no criticism. And then there was Grace, the disappointment. Grace, the one who couldn't get her life in order. Grace, whom my mother dismissed across that Thanksgiving table in front of 34 people without a second thought. But here's what no one in that room understood about Grace. Grace was the only one who visited Grandma Ellie. It began modestly. I went over one Sunday about 3 years before that Thanksgiving dinner. Olivia had casually mentioned that Grandma had called her, feeling lonely. Olivia claimed to be busy, and Ethan said he'd visit sometime. Since no one went, I did. I knocked on her door at 11:00 a.m. Grandma answered in her housecoat, her hair unbrushed, a look on her face suggesting she hadn't expected anyone to actually arrive. She observed me for a long moment. "Grace, come in. I just made coffee," she then said. That was the first Sunday. I returned the following Sunday, then the next, and within a month it became a weekly routine. I drove 40 minutes each way, sat in her kitchen, and we talked, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 3. She recounted her life. Growing up in Maine, meeting my grandfather at a dance hall in 1968, and raising 3 children in a house that was too small yet felt enormous due to the love within it. And I listened. She listened, not in the way my mother listened, which was merely waiting for her turn to speak. I listened as one listens to someone with something important to say, who has long awaited an audience. After approximately 6 months, I started noticing small details. A burnt-out light bulb in the hallway that had been dark for weeks, a leak under the kitchen sink leaving a brown stain on the cabinet, a stack of unopened medical bills on her counter. So, I replaced the light bulb. I contacted a plumber for the sink and covered the cost. I sat with her, meticulously reviewed the medical bills, and helped her distinguish what insurance would cover from what she needed to pay. She never requested any of this. I simply did it. Each time, she would look at me with a quiet, grateful, slightly surprised expression, as if she still couldn't fathom that someone had cared enough to bother. "You're the only one who comes, you know," she remarked to me one Tuesday in March, about 2 years into my visits. It wasn't a complaint, merely a statement of fact, delivered with the same tone one might use to describe the weather. I didn't tell her that I was aware. I didn't tell her that I had called my mother 3 times, suggesting that someone else in the family visit more frequently. I didn't tell her that each time, my mother had offered some variation of, "She's fine, she's old. That's what old people do." I simply squeezed Grandma's hand and said, "I like coming over," and I truly meant it. In September, about 2 months before that Thanksgiving dinner, Grandma Ellie's health began to decline. It wasn't sudden but gradual, as these things often are. She started forgetting minor details, where she'd put her keys, whether she'd had breakfast. One Tuesday, I arrived to find her sitting in the living room in the dark, TV off, staring blankly. She didn't seem to know what day it was. I took her to her doctor the next morning. Dr. Emily Hayes, who had been Grandma's physician for over 15 years, pulled me aside after the appointment. "Mrs. Vance is showing early signs of cognitive decline. It's not advanced, but it's present. She's going to need more support," she stated in a calm, clinical voice. I inquired if anyone else in the family was aware. Dr. Hayes regarded me carefully. "You're listed as her emergency contact, Grace. You've been attending every appointment for the last 8 months. As far as I can tell, you're the one providing her care." I was, indeed. I had been for a while, without fully realizing how central it had become to my life. I was the one refilling her prescriptions at the pharmacy on Maple Street every third Thursday. I was the one calling her every single morning at 8:15 a.m. just to ensure she was awake and eating. I was the one who, one Sunday, noticed she had forgotten to pay her electric bill for 2 consecutive months, not because she couldn't afford it, but because the paperwork had confused her. I quietly rectified the situation. He never knew. Yet, no one else in the family had called even once to check on her well-being. I called my mother that evening, explaining Dr. Hayes' assessment. I asked if Lisa could assist, even just once a week, perhaps just to sit with Grandma so I could have a break. My mother paused for a moment. Grace, I have a full-time job. Olivia has a full-time job. We can't all rearrange our lives because Grandma is getting old. That's what happens. She'll be fine, she responded. I called again 2 weeks later, receiving the same answer, this time with a hint less patience. I made a third call in late October after spending an entire weekend at Grandma's house because she had become confused and tried to leave at 3:00 a.m., convinced she needed to pick up my mother from school. This time, my mother didn't just dismiss me, she became frustrated. "You're spending too much time there, Grace. It's starting to seem weird. We have a life. Normal people don't do this. Just let her be." I hung up and didn't call again. That was 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, 3 weeks before my mother stood at that dinner table and declared to 34 people that I had never done anything for Grandma Aliner. I endured that toast, heard every word, and said nothing, having learned long ago that arguing with my mother in front of the family was a losing battle. She controlled the narrative, she always had. So I quietly departed, went home, called Grandma Ellie, and asked if she desired company the next morning. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that very much." Grandma Aliner passed away on December 8th. I was there. I was there because I had been there almost daily for the preceding 2 weeks, ever since her condition had worsened. I had taken unpaid leave from work. I had slept on her couch for 4 consecutive nights. I had contacted her doctor, spoken with the hospice nurse, ensured her medications were correct, held her hand during the difficult hours, and made her tea during the calmer ones. She died at 4:22 p.m. on a Tuesday. The hospice nurse was in the adjacent room. I sat in the chair beside her bed, holding her hand. She didn't utter anything dramatic at the end, nor did she deliver a final speech. She simply squeezed my fingers one last time, very gently, and then she was gone. I remained there for a long time afterward. I don't know how long, perhaps 20 minutes, perhaps an hour. The room was utterly quiet. Then I made the phone calls. I contacted the hospice office first, then the funeral home. Grandma had already arranged everything through a pre-need plan, so there wasn't much to do. Then I called my mother. Lisa answered on the second ring. I told her in a flat voice that Grandma had died. There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, was anyone with her?" my mother asked. "Yes, I was," I replied. Another pause. "I'll call Olivia and the boys. We'll figure out the funeral," she said. That was the entirety of the conversation. 12 seconds of silence, 2 questions, and a plan to organize the funeral. "No, are you okay?" "No, I'm sorry." Nothing. The funeral took place 3 days later, small and quiet. 41 people attended, mostly Grandma's old neighbors and a few friends from her church. My mother wore a black dress she purchased that morning. Olivia brought flowers that cost more than Grandma spent on groceries in a month. Ethan and Owen stood at the back and departed early. I stood alone at the graveside after everyone else had drifted toward the parking lot. I stayed for 15 minutes. I didn't cry. My tears had been shed in that quiet room on Tuesday afternoon, alone, with her hand in mine. At the funeral, I felt only emptiness, as if someone had reached into my chest and removed something that had kept me steady for years. Grandma Ellie was the only person in my family who had ever made me feel like I mattered. And now she was gone. It was 5 days after the funeral, 10 days after her death, when the group chat erupted. My mother had received an email from Grandma's estate attorney, a man named Daniel Callahan. No relation to us, despite the shared last name, a coincidence Grandma had always found amusing. The email was direct. A will reading had been scheduled. All named parties were required to attend. The date was set for the following Thursday at 2 p.m. What transpired next in that group chat revealed everything I needed to know about my family. Within an hour of my mother forwarding the email, Olivia had sent a message. "Okay, so what do we think the house is worth?" I looked it up. Whispering Pines Lane properties are going for $580,000 to $640,000 right now. Ethan replied. Plus whatever savings she had. Dad mentioned she had money somewhere. Owen asked. Are we splitting it 4 ways or 3? Does Grace even count? My mother interjected. We'll figure it out at the reading. Everyone just show up and be normal. No one mentioned Grandma, not once. Not a single person in that thread expressed rest in peace or I'm going to miss her or anything remotely similar. To them, it was simply a real estate transaction. I read every message but replied to none. I already knew what the will stated, not because I had snooped, manipulated, or done anything my mother would later accuse me of. I knew because Grandma herself had told me. 6 months earlier, on a tranquil Sunday afternoon, she had asked me to sit down. She held a cup of tea, and her face bore an expression I hadn't seen before. Serious, deliberate, as if she had contemplated something for a long time and had finally decided to articulate it. Grace, she said, I want you to know something about the will. I told her she didn't have to tell me. She waved her hand. I want to, it's important. She revealed everything, the house, the investments, the separate savings account she had maintained for 15 years, all of it, and she told me who would receive it. I know it's a lot, she said, and I know it's going to cause a fuss, but I've thought about it very carefully and I know what I want. I looked at her for a long time. Grandma, are you sure? I asked. She smiled. It was the warmest smile I had ever seen on her face. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Thursday, 2 p.m. The offices of Vance and Associates, located on the 14th floor of a downtown high-rise. The conference room was spacious, larger than necessary, featuring a long mahogany table, leather chairs, and a window overlooking the city. A box of tissues on the table struck me as a small, thoughtful detail that spoke volumes about the frequency of such meetings. I arrived at 1:45. The receptionist smiled and directed me to the room. I was alone for about 4 minutes, sitting in one of the chairs near the end of the table, hands folded, breathing steadily. My mother arrived at 1:52 with Olivia. They were impeccably dressed, not morning attire, but polished and composed. Olivia's hair was styled, and my mother wore a blazer I hadn't seen before. They sat across from me without speaking. My mother glanced at me once, quickly, the way one might look at something they'd rather avoid. Ethan arrived at 1:57. Owen appeared at 1:59, slightly out of breath, phone still in hand. Mr. Callahan entered precisely at 2 p.m. He was a tall man in his mid-60s, with neatly combed gray hair, a dark suit, and reading glasses suspended from a chain around his neck. He carried a manila folder and a leather portfolio, setting both on the table with the quiet precision of someone who had performed this task many, many times. Good afternoon, he began. Thank you all for being here. I want to start by saying that I'm sorry for your loss. Eleanor was a dear friend, and I know this is a difficult time. He paused, looking around the table. My mother nodded. Olivia shifted in her chair. Ethan checked his watch. I'm going to read the will now, Mr. Callahan continued. It is legally binding. It was executed on June 14th of this year, approximately 6 months before Eleanor's passing. It was witnessed by 2 parties unrelated to this family, and it was notarized at my office. I want to be clear about that before we begin, because it's important. He opened the manila folder. The estate of Eleanor Vance includes the following assets. He adjusted his glasses. The property at 14 Elm Creek Road, assessed at $620,000. A savings account at Brookfield National Bank holding $487,000. A brokerage investment account currently valued at $1,214,000. And a secondary savings account holding $41,000 in miscellaneous funds. He paused. The room was utterly still. $2,362,000. That was the number. I watched my mother perform the calculation in her head. I saw Olivia's eyes widen. I observed Ethan sit straighter in his chair. The bequests, Mr. Callahan announced, turning the page. To Lisa Sterling, $5,000. My mother blinked. She said nothing, but a subtle change registered on her face, a slight tightening around her eyes. To Olivia Sterling, $5,000. Olivia's mouth opened slightly, then she closed it. To Ethan Sterling, $5,000. Ethan looked down at the table. To Owen Sterling, $5,000. Owen looked at my mother, who did not return his gaze. Mr. Callahan turned the page again. He took a breath, then read the next line. The entirety of the remaining estate, including all property, all accounts, and all assets not otherwise specified, is to be given to Grace Elizabeth Sterling. No one spoke. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. I counted 10 full seconds during which no one in that room made a sound. No audible breathing, no shifting, nothing. The faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant city noises from 14 stories below were the only sounds. Then, Mr. Callahan announced, "There is also a letter." He reached into his leather portfolio, pulling out a single, cream-colored sheet of paper, folded in half. He unfolded it with great care, as if it were extremely delicate. He proceeded to read it aloud to my granddaughter, Grace. This letter aims to clarify my decision, though I suspect its reasoning is quite evident to any observant individual. Grace visited me weekly for 3 years. She undertook a 40-minute drive each way and never once voiced a complaint. She drove me to my doctor when no one else would. She settled my bills when my pride prevented me from asking. She sat with me on difficult days and brewed me tea on good ones. She was present when I felt afraid. She was present when I felt isolated. She was present as I faced my death. I observed my other grandchildren growing up, and I hold affection for them. However, Grace is the sole person who consistently appeared for me, not out of obligation, nor because she was instructed to, but because it was her genuine desire. I have considered this choice meticulously and made it with a clear mind and a full heart. Utilize this to build the existence you are worthy of, my dear girl. You have earned it. With all my love, Grandma Ellie. Mr. Callahan refolded the letter and placed it on the table. The quiet that followed this time held a different quality. It was not the same shocked stillness from moments before. This silence was deeper, more profound, carrying a noticeable weight. I was weeping. I had not intended to cry. I had not wanted to. Yet the letter, hearing her voice articulated in those words, listening to her express things she had never spoken aloud to me, not once throughout all those years, fractured something within my chest that I could no longer suppress. My mother was the first to speak. "This is a mistake," she declared, her voice extremely controlled, devoid of inflection. "Read it again." Mr. Callahan peered at her over the top of his spectacles. "Mrs. Sterling, I have read it accurately. The will is unambiguous. It can't be right." Grace didn't, she wasn't. My mother abruptly paused, seemingly catching herself, as if she realized she was on the verge of uttering something highly inappropriate in the presence of an attorney. Olivia then spoke. "There must be an error. Grandma wasn't thinking clearly. She experienced cognitive decline. Everyone knows that." Mr. Callahan gave a slow nod. "I understand your concern," he said, "but I wish to direct your attention to 2 specific points. First, this will was officially signed on June 14th, almost 6 months prior to Margaret's passing and long before any significant cognitive decline was formally documented. Second, I possess a statement from Dr. Emily Hayes, Margaret's physician, which confirms that Margaret was of sound mind and possessed full legal capacity at the time of signing. He reopened the portfolio and slid a printed document across the table. It was Dr. Marsh's statement, a single page, dated and signed. Furthermore, Mr. Callahan continued, my records contain phone logs showing Grace's calls to Margaret, averaging 4 per week over the last 3 years. I also have hospital visitor records from Margaret's hospitalization last April, which indicate Grace was present every single day for 9 consecutive days. I have receipts for medications, home repairs, and grocery deliveries, all paid for by Grace. And I have a sworn statement from Margaret's neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy Harrington, confirming that Grace was, to her knowledge, the only family member who visited regularly. He allowed that information to settle for a moment. Any challenge to this will, he stated, would inevitably fail. The evidence is irrefutable and thoroughly documented. I mention this not to be unkind, but because I wish to spare you the financial cost and the time. Margaret was exceedingly clear about her desires, and she wanted Grace to inherit her estate. The room fell quiet once more. Ethan was the next to speak, his voice sharpened with bitterness. So, she receives everything and we each get $5,000. That is what the will specifies. Yes. That's not fair, Owen exclaimed, sounding genuinely distressed for the first time in his life. We're her grandchildren too, Mr. Callahan regarded him with an expression that was not harsh, yet also lacked sympathy. Fairness, he said gently, is often a matter of individual perspective. Margaret based her decision on her personal experiences, and what she experienced was that one individual in this room consistently showed up for her. The will reflects that truth. My mother had turned noticeably pale. She gazed at the table, then at her hands, at nothing in particular. Olivia was looking at me for the first time that entire afternoon. There was an emotion in her expression I couldn't quite decipher. Anger, yes, but beneath it, something else. Something that bordered on shame. I remained silent. I sat in my chair, tears still drying on my face, and looked at Mr. Callahan. "Thank you for reading that," I said. He nodded. "The meeting is concluded. Claire, I will be in contact with you this week regarding the subsequent steps in executing the estate. The rest of you are welcome to remain as long as you wish." He gathered his folder and portfolio and then exited the room. My mother stood up. "Grace," she said, her voice taut and controlled. "We need to discuss this." I also rose. I picked up my coat. I looked at her, truly observed her for the first time in years, and I stated very softly, "No, we don't," and I walked out. The phone calls commenced that evening. My mother called me 14 times between 5:00 p.m. and midnight. I answered none of them. At 12:17 a.m., she sent a text message. "We need to discuss this like adults. Call me in the morning." I did not call her in the morning. By the following day, the family had reconvened. Olivia called me at 9:00 a.m. Her tone was notably different from her demeanor in the conference room, softer, more cautious, as if she were handling something fragile. "Grace, listen. Nobody is suggesting you don't deserve something, but $5,000 each. That's negligible. Grandma would want us to resolve this as a family." I listened to her speak for about 30 seconds. Then I said, "Olivia, the will stated what it stated, but I need to go." I hung up. By Thursday of that week, precisely 1 week after the reading, my mother had called me 47 times. 47. I know because I kept count. Ethan had sent 11 text messages. Owen had left 3 voicemails, each one more agitated than the last. Olivia had sent a single lengthy email that I read once and did not reply to. The messages progressed through predictable stages. Phase 1 was denial. "This cannot be correct. There must be another will. Grandma would never do such a thing." Phase 2 was anger. "You manipulated her. You turned her against us. This is exactly what you desired." Phase 3 was bargaining. "Just give us the house. Keep the money, split it 50-50, and we'll drop it. Come on, Claire, we're family." Phase 4, the final one and the most revealing, was desperation. "Please, we need to talk. Just pick up the phone." I did not pick up the phone. The following Monday, my mother retained her own lawyer, a man named Gregory Hale, who specialized in estate disputes. She filed a formal notice of intent to contest the will on the grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. I learned about it when Mr. Callahan telephoned me. "Mrs. Donovan has filed," he said, calm as ever. "I want you to understand that this is not unusual. It frequently occurs in cases like this, and I also want you to know that it is destined to fail." He reviewed the evidence with me once more. The phone records, the visitor logs, the receipts, Dr. Marsh's statement, the neighbor's testimony. He reminded me that the will had been executed 6 months prior to Grandma's death, well before any documented decline. He informed me that 2 unrelated witnesses had been present at the signing. He also mentioned that Margaret had updated the will 3 distinct times over a 2-year period, and every single version conveyed the identical message. "This contest will not be successful," he declared, "but it will incur costs for your mother. Attorney fees for a case of this nature typically range from $15,000 to $40,000. And if the contest fails, which it will, she will also be responsible for your legal fees, which I estimate to be somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000. I inquired if there was anything I needed to do. "No," he replied. "Simply allow the process to unfold. I will manage everything." The contest was formally heard 6 weeks later in probate court. I attended, but my presence was not required to take any action. Mr. Callahan presented the evidence quietly, systematically, one document at a time. Gregory Miller attempted to argue that Grandma had been mentally incapacitated, that I had isolated her from the rest of the family, and that the will was a result of manipulation. The judge, a woman identified as the Honorable Patricia Weiss, listened to every word. She meticulously reviewed each document. She posed a few questions and then delivered her ruling. "The evidence overwhelmingly supports the decedent's wishes," she stated. "This court finds no indication of undue influence, coercion, or lack of testamentary capacity. The will of Margaret Callahan is valid, properly executed, and will stand as written. The contest is denied." She paused. "I would also note," she added, "that the cost of this proceeding will be borne by the contesting party, and I would strongly advise against any further frivolous litigation in this matter, or sanctions will be considered." Gregory Miller did not appear pleased. My mother, seated 3 rows back, avoided eye contact with anyone. The total expense of the unsuccessful contest amounted to $34,200. My mother paid every single cent of it. In addition to the $5,000 she had already received, the only thing Grandma had bequeathed her, she had now spent nearly 7 times that sum attempting to seize what was not rightfully hers. The weeks following the ruling were quiet, more so than I had anticipated. My mother ceased calling. Olivia sent one more text, comprising just 2 words, "I'm sorry," and then nothing further. Ethan and Owen became entirely silent. The group chat, which had been active with messages for years, went completely dormant. I made no effort to contact any of them. I dedicated the first few weeks after the estate was settled to doing what Grandma would have wanted me to do. I drove to the house on Whispering Pines Lane. I walked through every room. I touched the items that had belonged to her, the photographs on the mantel, the old books on the shelf, the mug from which she always drank her coffee. I sat in her kitchen in her chair, and I wept for a while, not for the money, but for her, because she was gone. And no amount of inheritance could alter that fact. When the grief subsided into something more manageable, something I could bear without being overcome, I began to consider what to do with what she had left me. I kept the house, not to sell it, not to renovate it for profit, not to generate income from it. I kept it because it was hers and because it held meaning. I arranged for it to be cleaned and repaired, fixed the broken elements, and painted the room she had intended to paint. I transformed it into the house she would have desired it to be if she had received assistance sooner. I donated a portion of the savings to the hospice organization that had cared for Grandma in her final days. Another portion went to a scholarship fund at the local community college, the type of support I never received for people like me. And I retained the remainder quietly, carefully, just as Grandma had. Not because I needed to demonstrate anything to anyone, but because it was hers and now it was mine, and I intended to honor it. I visit her grave once a week on Tuesdays, the same day I used to visit her at the house. I bring her a cup of Earl Grey tea, the kind she enjoyed, and I sit on the bench near the headstone, talking to her for a while about my week, about the house, about nothing in particular. It feels peculiar to converse with someone who cannot respond, but it also feels profoundly right. Sometimes I recall that Thanksgiving toast, my mother's glass raised, the wine catching the light, to the family that actually matters. I think about the 33 glasses that were lifted. I think about the 10 seconds of silence in that conference room when Mr. Callahan read my name. And I think about the letter, the one Grandma wrote, the one she folded and entrusted to her lawyer in a leather portfolio 6 months before her death, knowing exactly the impact it would have when read aloud. You have earned it, my dear girl. I did not earn it because I coveted the money. I did not earn it because I was attempting to prove something to my mother or to anyone else in that room. I earned it because I showed up. Week after week, year after year, I showed up for the sole person in my life who had ever made me feel sufficient. And in the end, she showed up for me too. My mother called me one last time approximately 2 months after the ruling. It was late at night, and I allowed it to go to voicemail. The message was brief, just a few sentences. I listened to it once. She did not apologize. She did not request anything. She simply said, "I hope you realize what you've done to this family, Grace." I listened to it. I contemplated it for a while and then deleted it. Some things, once they are spoken, cannot be unsaid, and some doors, once they are closed, do not need to reopen. I had made my peace with that a long time ago. I just didn't know, until Grandma Ellie showed me, that it was acceptable to let go.